Okay, here we go with recording. Let's talk about treating autoimmune disease with hookworms. This is part 6 of the hookworm series. The Australian hookworm study, done by these geniuses here from Australia. And basically what they did was they gave 10 celiac patients, and as you probably know, celiac is a very strong allergic reaction to gluten, wheat. And they gave them they gave them each, I think they gave them each 10 hookworms. They gave it a couple months for it to establish itself, 3 months. And then they slowly increased the amount of gluten that they were giving them. The equivalent of probably a small stick pretzel of gluten per day, and slowly increasing up to what would be the equivalent of a small bowl of pasta at the end of a month. And at the end of that month, these celiac patients who previously had a very severe allergic reaction to gluten, where just a sprinkle would make them very symptomatic with intestinal symptoms, they could eat a whole small bowl of pasta with no symptoms at all. So then at the end of a year, they offered to kill everyone's hookworms off, but no one took them up on it because they said there's no way we're going to go back to living the way we were, and we're going to keep our friends inside of us. So very interesting. I feel very grateful to these geniuses for doing such study, and obviously you can look up and find more details online. There's a whole article on it. Just Google, obviously, Australian hookworm and study. All right, so again, you've seen this slide. IBS, very predominant in countries from a Nordic background where the worm population has been killed off. So obviously Scandinavian countries, England, Ireland, off to the US, Canada, and down to Australia. So they did a couple different tests, and they did find that slowly increasing the gluten with what they called micro challenges worked better than just putting the patients on a full dose of gluten right away. And the reason is by doing the micro challenges, they're slowly growing the right bacterial population to help the body digest the gluten. And the worms play that role, again, their conductor role, by putting the right bacteria in place. So again, it's interesting to, not again, but it's interesting to think here. It seems like human beings can only eat wheat if they have worms, at least a high percentage of humans. My humans can only do that. So the question is, did worms enable civilization by enabling us to eat wheat? Because we need wheat and those grains because they feed us when other foods are not available. To have a civilization that was capable of surviving, highs and lows in other food sources. So I would say the Australian hookworm study says yes. Again, here's suppression of inflammatory immune response in celiac disease by experimental hookworm infection. So fantastic. I mean, really, honestly, this is what my days of research center around. It's so fascinating to have this information. Okay, moving on here. I'm recording here, Quinn. You're talking over my recording. Sorry for that slight interruption. Sometimes my young son likes to get his 2 cents in here. Okay, so the Australian hookworm study, and here's diabetes, which we see spread out across the Anglo world, more or less. Of course, a couple of countries, the top of Africa, where worm eradication programs have been instituted. Those that are kind of touching the top of Europe there. And this is where the worms are, kind of the opposite of where the diabetes is. Very interesting, isn't it? I mean, just Look at those countries in Africa that have worm eradication programs, and they're full of diabetes, and those that don't, and they don't have diabetes. Very, very interesting. Okay, we see Crohn's and colitis is where Nordic people live that don't have worms. We see Parkinson's disease is also in Nordic countries where people have that Viking influence but don't have worms. You get the point now. Here's a study of worms on Crohn's patients, and we see that their symptoms go down and stay down 5 months and even out 10 months. One of the patients obviously either probably needed more worms. But this is amazing for those of you that know Crohn's patients or have Crohn's patients. The drug effects are very toxic, and there's very little hope for them to have normal function. And here we see that's the disease index on the left. And we see great decreases in disease symptoms with hookworms. Again, with the transplant, using worms in organ transplantation, a course of helminthic therapy is worm therapy, may be commenced before transplantation, allowing tolerance to occur. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Of course, I don't know if our current environment is going to support that kind of research, but it would be nice if it did. Again, another article on the immunological tolerance. The parasite's success and survival is a result of their active immunomodulation of their host immune response. And they have a number of benefits for the host. That is for sure. So a little article here on scientists finding bacteria where it isn't supposed to be, the brain. This whole myth that there's parts of the body which are aseptic and don't have any bacteria. But if you think about it, there's bacteria down in volcanic vents in the bottom of the ocean. So wherever there's an ecosystem, you'll find bacteria, obviously without exception. And therefore, you're going to find bacteria in the brain and nervous system. The key is not to have an inflammatory reaction to that normal bacteria. That's where you'll get your chronic brain diseases. And here's neuropsychiatric features of systemic autoimmune disorders. In other words, brain symptoms with inflammation, inflammatory brain syndrome. And you can read through these if you want, but just everything you can imagine. Mood changes, confusion, cognitive decline, memory impairment, personality changes, anxiety, affective disorders. All kinds of bad things happen when you have inflammation in your body. And there's the emerging link between autoimmune disorders and neuropsychiatric disease, obviously. In fact, till proven otherwise, any mood disorder is an inflammatory brain disease, until proven otherwise. Again, here's a patient that I tested, very inflammatory, where they're raising their CD8 levels. Their body's doing this, trying to downregulate their immune system. So the body's trying to figure it out without the benefit of worms. Diabetes versus hookworms. Yellow has the highest diabetes, red has the lowest. Same pattern, you guys know it by now. Same pattern here, highest in Europe, lowest in Africa. This mushy slide is showing you a study they did on mice. And when they gave them mice hookworms, it blocks the pro-inflammatory cytokines, and it also increases the IL-10. IL-10 is the body's own natural prednisone. So that's what you want. Parkinson's disease again. There are race-related differences in disease. I think that is very important and misunderstood. It's very important to know the patterns that you're looking at so you can recognize them. In a way, though, I'm happy to treat all the races that come in. I really sometimes feel the need to refer to people that have seen a lot of that particular racial group so they can recognize the subtleties that I might see in my own family and my own patients. Anyway, white people get ankylosing spondylitis, which is a degenerative spine inflammatory disease, and African black people don't get that because their genes are different. No other factor. Again, this is worms that prevent type 1 diabetes in mice. So there you go. If they can do it in mice, they can do it in humans. Again, more worms that prevent inflammatory disease in animal models. Prevent thyroiditis, colitis, inflammatory bowel, arthritis. Really good stuff. Okay, we'll continue with part 6.